How would you solve this crime? This murder was ridiculous. The police had been on it for a month. The door was locked from the inside. No fingerprints, no footprints. From the doorknob to the windowsill to the floor, every trace they collected was either too smudged to use or didn't match any known suspect. The hallway camera recorded everything from dusk until late at night. The footage looked perfectly normal. You only ever see the victim walk down the hallway and into the door. On the footage, no one else ever showed up in that part of the hallway. The victim's calls, bank transfers, social media history were as clean as a freshly reinstalled operating system. No enemies, no lost money, no I can't go on kind of warning signs. Every evidence kept hammering the same conclusion. The entire night, he was alone. If the story stopped here, you would probably assume the next step is either the police keep running circles or some genius inspector shows up and solves the whole case from a tiny speck of ash. But the real-world plot twist was neither stylish nor romantic. It started with something so ordinary you wouldn't look at it twice. The police held a nationally televised press conference. The kind of image you've seen 100 times when you turn on the TV. The officer gave the time of death. She said the victim died instantly, with no signs of struggle. Then she walked through a few crime scene photos in a flat, official tone. Nothing that seemed special to anyone watching. Within minutes, the comment section on the live stream exploded. Some people cursed the police for being incompetent. Some people went straight into conspiracy theories. Some did a serious forensics breakdown in the replies. On the internet, people were already posting their own suspect lists. Ex-coworkers, old classmates, anyone who had ever argued with him. Outside the station, a small crowd showed up just to yell at the officers and tell them to go home if they couldn't do their job. The only person who kept coming back was the victim's mother. Every few days, she stood at the front desk, eyes swollen from crying, slamming her hand on the counter. If you don't catch anyone, I'll be here every single day. A few days later, an official update. The killer has been caught. Case closed. So, what gave the killer away? There's a slightly evil trick that works embarrassingly well on the internet. If you want to answer, don't ask a question. Instead, say something wrong confidently. You've probably seen this play out. Someone posts a sincere question. They explain the context, they are polite, they are grateful in advance, and the thread just sits there. But the moment someone shows up with a loud, oversimplified, slightly wrong answer, the entire comment section wakes up. Now you get, that's not how it works at all. Please don't spread misinformation. You're mixing up X and Y, and somewhere in there is the exact answer you wanted. When there was just a question, almost nobody wanted to help. But once there is a wrong answer, everyone wants to correct it. There's even a half-joking name for this pattern, known as Cunningham's Law, named after Ward Cunningham, who created the first wiki software in 1995. Just a side note, wiki and Wikipedia are not the same thing. Wiki is a type of website where the pages themselves can be directly edited in the browser by many users. Wikipedia is the biggest example of that idea, an online encyclopedia built using wiki software. And if you think about it, Wikipedia is basically a giant live demo of Cunningham's Law, in a very positive way. Millions of people constantly correcting and refining what was written before. So what's actually going on here? Why are people more eager to correct than to answer? We can peel it apart in a few layers. First layer, your brain is a prediction engine. Your brain doesn't just passively perceive the world, it constantly projects a model of what should happen next. A standard question fits that model. It doesn't create much cognitive conflict, but a wrong answer violates the model. This triggers a prediction error, a sharp cognitive spike that forces your brain to drop everything and resolve the conflict. You don't just notice the mistake, you are biologically compelled to fix it. Second layer, once attention is hooked, correcting is cheaper than creating. Giving a full answer from zero is hard work. You have to choose where to start, what to explain, and how deep to go. Fixing a mistake is much easier. This part is backwards. You forgot this case. You don't build a full explanation, you only fix the spots that bother you. So your brain prefers to correct because it costs less effort. Third layer, there is status baked into correction. Publicly correcting someone's mistake quietly signals a few things. I know this topic well enough to judge it. I saw something others missed. If other people like or upvote your correction, you get a tiny hit of social reward. You feel smart. You feel you know better. So if we zoom out, that wrong answer is no longer just a mistake. It is a bait. You introduce a controlled error into a silent, passive crowd to force it to react. The error creates something a bit like potential energy, a tension that the community feels compelled to resolve. And in the process of resolving it, they reveal the very information you were looking for. You are essentially trading a small amount of pride, looking bravely foolish, to extract a high-fidelity signal from a noisy world. But this mechanic, using a flaw as bait to make the invisible visible, isn't limited to Wikipedia or Reddit or Stack Overflow. It's widely used in so many areas. For example, in cybersecurity, if you want to catch the predator in the digital world, sometimes you don't build a higher wall. You build a door that looks like it was left open by mistake. You build a honeypot. The philosophy behind it boils down to one simple question. Who actually tried to touch the fake meat? You are creating a digital trap designed to mimic a mistake. Why do we need this? Because security experts face a massive asymmetry. Sophisticated hackers don't look like hackers. Once they break into a network, they are quiet. They steal credentials. They pretend to be regular employees. In a stream of millions of data packets, they are invisible. So how do you find a spy who blends in perfectly? You don't hunt them. You bait them. You look for the greed that drives them. You create a fabricated flaw inside your own network. Maybe it's a server that looks like it was configured by an amateur. Maybe it's a database named Q3 Financial Report, unprotected. Maybe it's a sloppy piece of code with an AWS API key left in the comments. To a regular employee, someone just doing their job, these things are invisible. They have no reason to look for them, and no desire to touch them. They just walk past. But to an attacker is hunting. They are scanning for weakness. To them, that exposed key is an irresistible error, and that is the trap. A honeypot is one of the machines in your network whose business value is deliberately set to 0. It does not serve customers, it does not carry real workloads, and no legitimate process is supposed to depend on it. If you unplug it, nothing in the company is supposed to break. A honeypot has 3 very concrete benefits. First, it radically simplifies analysis. On real systems behind the firewall, or on those monitoring tools that watch live traffic and raise alerts, you first have to separate normal users from attackers before you can study anything. Whereas on a well-designed honeypot, almost nobody should show up by accident. So you can treat activity as hostile by default and spend your time analyzing how attackers move, not debating whether they are attackers at all. Second, it can surface internal trouble as well as outside attacks. If a bored employee, a malicious insider, or a stolen account starts poking at data they were never meant to see, they can also trigger the honeypot. Third, over time, a honeypot also becomes a record of how attacks are changing and evolving. Leave it running for weeks or months, and you can look back and see which services get probed most often, what weaknesses attackers still chase, and what common hacking tools show up again and again. So you can strengthen your systems against real observed behavior, not just theoretical threat models. One of the earliest famous honeypot cases in computer security, and a beautiful example of error as bait, started with a 75-cent billing discrepancy. In 1986, Clifford Stoll was not a cybersecurity expert. He was a long-haired astronomer who had just been transferred to the basement to run computers at Lawrence Berkeley lab. And back then, mainframe computer time was expensive. One day, while reconciling the monthly Unix accounting bills, Stoll noticed a tiny discrepancy. The system's logs were off by exactly 75 cents. It was just 75 cents. In such a massive system, most administrators would write it off as a rounding error and move on. But Stoll was a scientist, and to a scientist, if the numbers don't add up, the universe is broken. So he dug through the logs and he found a ghost, a user named Hunter. This account has no valid billing code and no real person behind it. It was an intruder, a hacker stealing computer time for free. Standard procedure would be to delete the account, patch the hole, and kick the hacker out. but Stoll didn't. He realized this tiny accounting error was actually a footprint. He started tracing, but he hit a massive wall. The hacker would only stay online for a few minutes at a time, but to trace the call across the Atlantic, the German Bundespost needed hours to manually trace the lines. Every time they got close, the hacker vanished. Stoll needed a bait, a piece of fake meat so tasty that the hacker wouldn't let go. He noticed the hacker was searching for keywords: nuclear, SDI, and Star Wars. So Stoll and his girlfriend Martha spent a weekend fabricating a massive lie. They built a fake department inside the computer, SDI-Net, the Strategic Defense Initiative Network. They forged hundreds of documents. They even invented a fake secretary named Barbara Sherwin, who complained in memos about her heavy workload, making the fake department feel incredibly real. Then they left those files out in the open and waited. The hacker took the bait. Faced with what looked like top secret US military plans, he got greedy. He started downloading everything. To download all these massive files, which he thought were secrets but were actually garbage, he had to stay online for a solid hour. That was enough. That 1 hour of grade allowed the German police to pinpoint an apartment in Hanover. Now, for months, everyone assumed this was a prank. Stoll thought he was chasing a bored grad student from Berkeley. The FBI dismissed it as a kid having fun. But when they searched that apartment, they found Marcus Hess. And he wasn't just a bored student, he was selling the stolen data to the Soviet KGB. This was an excellent example of error as bait. If Stoll had just deleted the account the day he found that 75-cent error, Marcus Hess could have just changed his login and continued his espionage. But Stoll didn't rush to correct the error, he turned it into a bait. He let the error drag the entire hidden structure out into the light. That was 1986. Today, honeypots are still widely used in computer security, usually categorized along 3 axes. First is purpose. Production honeypots sit inside corporate networks to detect intruders and capture basic data. Research honeypots are complex labs used by experts to dissect how adversaries attack. Second is interaction level. Low interaction decoys often serve as smoke detectors. High interaction systems look like real systems and keep attackers busy long enough to show their techniques and identity. And third is location. We can deploy these probes on the network, host, application, client, etc. But the core mechanism remains the same. Engineer a deliberate mistake, make it the bait. At this point, we have a few very different scenes on the table. A perfect crime and a strangely clumsy press conference that still doesn't quite add up. An online comment section that only wakes up when someone posts a wrong answer, a honeypot server that has 0 business value and exists only to lure attackers, plus that 75-cent accounting bug, and an entire fake SDI-Net department built out of thin air. On the surface, these live in completely different worlds, but if you zoom out, they are all doing the same thing, guided by one simple principle. When you can't chase everyone, you design the game so the ones who truly care have to step forward. And in all these stories, what draws them out is not a polished truth, but a deliberate, precisely placed error. Let's take a step back. What's the essence of a bait? There may not be a single standard answer, but here are a few possible ways to look at it. First, a bait turns an active search over a huge space into a small self-selection test. You don't scan every option, you define one condition and observe who chooses to satisfy it. Second, you can see bait as a small local reward that quietly bends someone's strategy space. If a tiny bump in payoff can redirect behavior, that alone is useful information. Third, bait is perhaps a compressed measurement of high-dimensional behavior. A single reaction to a bait is perhaps a compressed snapshot of goals, constraints, and blind spots. In that sense, bait is also a kind of resonance check. One simple tap on the system and you see which parts ring. So how is using an error as bait different from ordinary bait? First, ordinary bait is tuned to desire, drawing in reward seekers. Error as bait is tuned to error detection, drawing in people who can't stand a visible flaw. Second, even though both kinds of bait require you to understand the target, using an error as bait forces you to answer a few extra questions. What is actually true here? What must never be touched? And where can I safely introduce a controlled wrong turn? You're not just shaping preference, you are drawing a sharp line between reality and the sandbox error. So let's go back to the story at the beginning. At this point, you probably guessed what really happened. That press conference was a carefully planned trap, a piece of bait from start to finish. In front of everybody watching, the police planted 3 small deliberate errors that only the real killer would truly notice. The wrong time, a timeline that did not match what he had actually lived through, the wrong cause of death, details that did not fit what he knew about how the victim really died, the wrong rug, a staged detail in the crime scene photos, casually written off as just decoration. These mistakes were not there to inform the public, they were there to filter the crowd. For over 99.99% of viewers, they were useless noise, but for the person who created that crime scene, those errors were impossible to ignore. They clashed with his memory of the night. They poked his private sense of, I'm the one who knows what really happened. The comment he left under the video of the press conference was not a dumb slip, it was an act of showing off. He believed he was completely safe in the dark, with so much information advantage that he could afford to mock the police and correct them in public. He thought he was teaching them how to do their job. In reality, he was doing exactly what they wanted, turning their planted mistakes into the clearest evidence against himself. That is what error as bait looks like. You put a controlled mistake into the world and you watch who rushes to fix it and what they reveal when they do.